The majority of people feel like retirement is a specific age. So as soon as they turn 65, they'll be able to retire and they won't have to work anymore. But that's not really how the world works. I think that the majority of people who are thinking this way, the people who are thinking that retirement is a number at 65, they're going to be able to retire or whatever they're thinking, I think those people are going to be working a lot longer because number one, their savings aren't going to sustain them. And number two, their government is going to work as hard as it can to make them continue working because they're a cash cow to their government. If they're not working, then they're not generating tax revenue. They're actually taking money out of the system, as in the pensions that we have in each country, like CPP in Canada or Social Security in the US. And if too many people start taking money out of those systems, they're probably going to collapse very quickly. So in this video, I want to go into why retirement really isn't a number and how you can retire a lot sooner or a lot later than whatever your government or the people around you tell you that retirement age should be. Let's get started. I saw this post on X from Unusual Whales. It says Germany has proposed raising the retirement age to 73 to prevent the collapse of the pension system. Why is it that the pension system is going to collapse? Why is it that the pension system isn't funded well enough to fund the people who are retiring in the future? Why is it that governments are giving these promises to people that they clearly can't fulfill? They're not going to be able to fulfill the promises that they give you, where they say that they're going to give you a certain amount of money if you retire. They're going to fund your lifestyle. You won't have to work. They're not going to be able to do all of this. They're just going to keep increasing the age. For example, here, 73. So they're just going to keep increasing the retirement age to a point where you just won't retire. You're going to have paid into this fund where you put money into this pension account, this government funded or government controlled pension account, and it gives you absolutely nothing. I had to respond to this because I think this is such an important concept. You have to remember that nobody is coming to save you. You're on your own. If you rely on your government, you're never going to retire. You need to be the one that saves for your retirement and pays attention to your future, not your government. Your government does not care about you. You are just a number. All you are is one cow in their entire herd of cattle that are continuously generating tax revenue for them. And that's what they see you as. That's your value. They value you as a way to create more cash flow for them in the future. You are going to be the one who pays for your government's stupid decisions. For example, Germany sold their 50,000 Bitcoin or so for $50,000 each, 54, 55, whatever the price was. And now their citizens are going to work much harder for it. If they had just held that Bitcoin and they had put it into their pension funds, whatever the pension is called in Germany, if they had put that Bitcoin into the pension instead of selling the Bitcoin for something that can be printed, think about how much better off the people in Germany would have been. So they sold their Bitcoin for something like $2.7 billion. And now that Bitcoin is worth $6.2 billion. So they lost out on $3.5 billion. How many people's retirements do you think that they could have funded with this Bitcoin, with this 3.5 billion additional dollars that they would have gotten in their pension accounts? How many people do you think that they would have been able to help? Over time, if they keep dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin, they would probably do much better than other countries, and they wouldn't have to propose stupid things like this where they force you to work longer just so that you can earn whatever crappy pension that they're going to give you. And that pension doesn't even cover all of your expenses. And I got this really great comment here from Dominican Hoddle. The government does not care for you. You'll be indebted for life if you wait for the government to show you welfare. Take custody and control your own financial future. What this means is you need to own Bitcoin. Retirement is your choice. You get to choose when you retire. If you own Bitcoin, whenever your Bitcoin is worth 10 times your annual expenses, you can very likely retire at that point. I don't know when that'll be. I don't know how much Bitcoin you can buy. I don't know what your capacity is for taking risk. But at some point, whatever amount of Bitcoin you have will be worth 10 times your annual expenses. And at that point, you'll have enough money to retire. And here's what I mean by that. For example, let's say you buy $500 worth of Bitcoin every single month, and your cost of living is increasing by 5%. So that's your inflation. At some point, your Bitcoin is going to be worth 10 times whatever your annual expenses are. In this example, I put in $5,500 as the monthly expenses. So that would be $66,000 in annual expenses. So today, your Bitcoin stack is worth $0, which is 0% of your annual expenses. In 2026, so a year from today, if Bitcoin grows at 35% per year. You can see that here. If Bitcoin grows at 35% per year, your Bitcoin stack will be 11.69% of your total annual expenses. If it grows again by 2027, and of course, I know that this isn't going to be linear over time, this will happen, but just stick to what I'm saying here. If it keeps growing and growing the way that I think it will, and I think that it's going to do a lot better than what it's doing today, if it keeps doing even a fraction of what I think it will, at some point, your Bitcoin is going to be 10 times your annual expenses. So we can see here, in this case, if you buy $500 worth of Bitcoin every single month and Bitcoin grows at 35% per year, your expenses are $66,000 today and your inflation rate is 5%. I think that the reported inflation rate is much lower than this. Your $500 per month of Bitcoin purchases would have accumulated and it would be worth 11.65 times your annual expenses. So you'd have enough savings for 11 and a half years of living without having to work. The longer you go, the longer you keep stacking, the better off you'll be. So let's say, for example, by 2041, in 16 years, you'd have 19 times your annual expenses. So you would have saved 19 years worth of expenses in 16 years. Whereas if you were to invest in the stock market where you get a 10% return, and I know the numbers will be slightly different from an actual compound interest calculator, but bear with me here, they'll be close enough to give you an accurate picture of what's going on. By 2041, if you were to invest in the stock market and it gives you a 10% return, you'd only have 1.64 years worth of expenses saved, which is terrible because in 16 years, you put your wealth away, you put your money into the stock market and you expected that at some point it'll be able to cover your expenses, but it can only cover you for a year and a half in 16 years of working. And again, with Bitcoin, if you get a 35% return instead of 10%, you're going to have 19.4 years of expenses paid for by 2041 compared to the S&P 500 with 1.64 years of expenses paid for. So retirement isn't really a number. What it is your ability to pay for what you need to pay for. Even if you work until 65 and your government says that we're going to support you, you may still not be able to retire. You may still have to work a part-time job or you may have to take a full-time job because the money that your government gives you may not be enough to pay for your expenses. So what do you do in that case? How do you know that at 65 you'll actually be able to retire? Most people can't answer this question. They have no idea. They're going to get rug pulled by their government and they're not even going to realize it until it's way too late. And these people are going to be the ones who die on the Walmart floor. And what I mean by that is they're going to work and work and work. They're going to have to take on part-time jobs. They're going to have to take on multiple jobs because the pensions that they get aren't going to be enough to cover their expenses. So they're going to be working, and at some point you're going to start seeing that people who are working are senior citizens and they're dying because they just got too old and they had to work these jobs because the pensions that they were relying on weren't enough to pay for their expenses. If you're young, you need to make sure that you're taking an appropriate amount of risk to make sure that your portfolio will cover you whenever you do want to retire. So for example, let's say you're 50 and you have $200,000 worth of assets. Those $200,000 worth of assets probably won't be worth that much by the time you retire at 65. And you probably won't be able to retire using those assets because at some point you're going to run out of money. If you start selling your assets, you're going to run out of assets to sell. And the worst thing that could happen to you is that you live way too long, which is a terrible way to think. So let's take a look at the compound interest calculator to see what exactly would happen. So in this case, let's say you have $200,000 worth of assets, you sell a quarter of them or a little bit more than a quarter of them, and you buy half a Bitcoin. So you're going to go from 0 Bitcoin to 0.5 Bitcoin, which is worth $61,000 today. And it doesn't seem like much, but at some point, that $61,000 worth of Bitcoin in 10 years will be worth 1.2 million. Then in 15 years, it'll be worth 5.56 million. Whereas if you have $200,000 in index funds, that's probably not going to be worth even close to this in 15 years. So let's say, for example, you keep those $200,000 worth of assets and you keep adding $500 every month to that pot of assets and you get a 10% return. Let's say you buy the S&P 500, you continue to get a 10% return for the next 15 years. You'll end up with $1.1 million. Whereas with Bitcoin, if you just get rid of 30% of your portfolio, you put that 30% into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin gives you a way better return. It will. It has to. There's no way that it won't because Bitcoin is a superior asset to index funds. So if you take 30% of your portfolio, you buy Bitcoin with it, you're going to see in 15 years, it's going to be worth $5.5 million. Whereas with index funds, if you just left the entire amount there and you added more money to it, it's worth a fraction of what your Bitcoin would be worth. I think this is one of the biggest problems that we're going to face over the next decade or so. a lot of people who are expecting to retire aren't going to be able to retire because they're not going to be able to pay for their expenses. Your property taxes will go up, your maintenance and repairs will go up for your house, your car will get more expensive. It'll get more expensive to maintain your car, your gas will get more expensive. Your food is definitely going to get more expensive, especially if you eat real foods rather than the manufactured garbage that they put in all of the aisles at Costco. So, how is it possible that you're going to be able to afford whatever your cost of living is in 15 years when you can barely even afford it today while you're working a full time job? Most people are going to literally work forever because they don't understand this concept. They think that the government is coming to save their life when the government really isn't. Most people would rather not take any excessive risk where they hold assets that are not the status quo. They'd rather listen to their financial advisor and do whatever their financial advisor tells them to, rather than doing the research for themselves and studying what Bitcoin is and buying it and holding on to it for the next few decades. Keep in mind that the younger you are, the more of an impact you can have on your retirement if you start stacking Bitcoin. So let's say, for example, if you're 20 years old today and you start buying a few dollars worth of Bitcoin every single month, and then over time you keep adding more and you keep buying more and you keep buying more, you're going to see that your portfolio is worth way more than if you had put that money into the stock market. So let's say, for example, you can only buy $25 worth of Bitcoin every single month. Bitcoin gives you a 35% return. We'll put this back to zero. In the first year, you're going to see that you have about 242,000 Satoshis worth about $405. But over time, this amount of money is going to keep increasing and increasing in value until at some point it will be worth 10 times your expenses. So if you're 30 years old today and you can buy this $25 worth of Bitcoin per month, by 2050, so 25 years from now, your stack is going to be worth $2 million. It'll be 936,000 Satoshis. Now, keep in mind that these numbers may seem ridiculous, and I get it. If Bitcoin keeps giving you a 35% return per year, it'll be worth $223,000 by 2050. But the point here is that over time, your wealth will keep building and it'll build much faster than any other asset. So even if these numbers are half of what I'm predicting them to be, you'd still be better off buying Bitcoin compared to the stock market because Bitcoin will give you a much better return. And you can see here by 2050, your $25 worth of Bitcoin per month will be worth 9.38 times your annual expenses. At that time, your annual expenses would be $223,000 because of inflation, because things will continue to get more and more expensive. But your Bitcoin, your $25 worth of Bitcoin per month, will be worth 9.38 times your annual expenses. So in 25 years, you would have bought $7,500 worth of Bitcoin, but your Bitcoin would be worth $2 million. If we wait another few years, let's say you wait until 2055, your Bitcoin will be worth almost $10 million. Because at that point, we can see here, if Bitcoin keeps growing at 35% per year, it'll be worth $1 billion. And I don't know if that'll happen. I would personally say that the likelihood of that happening is probably more than the likelihood of Bitcoin going to zero because the US dollar is worthless. It can keep losing value. Every single year, it can keep losing 35% of its purchasing power in terms of Bitcoin because it's worthless. It's worth absolutely nothing. If you did the exact same thing with the stock market, you buy $25 worth of index funds every single month, gives you a 10% return every single year, and you do it for 30 years, your investment would only be worth $56,000 versus with Bitcoin, it would be worth significantly more, $10 million from these numbers here. So it's up to you how much risk you take. I would say that if you're young, you should be taking a lot more risk because you have a lot more time to recover if things don't go as planned. If you don't take any risk and you just keep putting money in your bank account, you're going to see that no matter how hard you work, eventually your expenses will outpace whatever savings you have, and your savings are only going to be worth about 1 or 2 years worth of your expenses, and you're never going to be able to retire. So stop thinking of retirement as a number. You don't have to be 65 to retire. You can retire much sooner than that if you really want to. Think of retirement as simply being able to pay for your expenses. If you can pay for your expenses and you don't have to go to work, then you can retire. If you can pay for your expenses and you don't have to go to work, then you can become work optional. You can choose to go to work. And if your employer pisses you off, you can leave the job if you want to. What I recommend is that you scan this code and you join the free webinar that I'm going to be holding about a week from now. I'm going to go through the buy, borrow, die strategy with Bitcoin so that you can at some point retire with however much Bitcoin you have. At some point, you can take on loans against that Bitcoin. You can borrow against it. You never have to sell that Bitcoin for fiat again. So if you're young, take more risks. Don't expect that you're going to be able to retire because your government will allow you to retire. You have to take ownership of your future. If you don't take ownership of your future, you're going to be working literally forever. If you want to learn why you should accumulate at least 0.1 Bitcoin or 10 million Satoshis, watch this video right here.